What's the line here? Do you think are people thinking that the DFL did do a good job of responding? Because Republicans seem to have shaped the narrative on this.
They sure have. And Tim Walz was sort of in a box. The more he did to combat fraud and expose additional instances on his terms, the worse it looked. And so this was going to continue throughout the year because he had laid out a series of steps where there were going to be more investigators, more searches of records of the past to see if there are any anomalies. And so they knew that there all year long there was going to be this drumbeat of fraud allegations that were coming out, and it was all going to be on his watch. So as much as he said, "I'm taking accountability," people question whether that held true.
So if you're just tuning in, we're in the midst of live special coverage of a major turn in the 2026 Minnesota governor's race. Incumbent Governor Tim Walz decided not to run for a third term. He's issued a statement outlining some of his reasons for the decision, and we're waiting for the governor to appear in his reception room at the Capitol before the press corps to talk more about his abrupt move. Brian Baxton studio with me. I'm Kathy Wurzer. Joining us right now is DFL State Senator Erin Murphy, leader of the DFLers in the state Senate. She's on the line. Thanks for taking the time, Senator.
Good morning.
Well, this, as I say, has been a big turn, and I'm curious as to if Governor Walz called you either over the weekend or this morning to say, this is what I'm thinking about doing.
I want to say first that I am really struck by what is, from my perspective, a really selfless act on the part of Governor Walz, recognizing what we are experiencing in Minnesota and stepping aside at this moment. It is a rare, I think, political act coming from somebody who describes himself as a servant leader, and I think today he's embodying that. It is a shock to the system, if you will. He and I have known each other for a number of years. We have become good partners in this work together, and we have been talking right along about the work that we have to do for the people of Minnesota. And I'm grateful to talk with you this morning.
You call it selfless. I think Democratic Party leader Ken Martin, a former state DFL party chair, calls the governor's decision brave. But I was reading an article from the Fargo Forum, and it quoted our friend Stephen Shear, a political science professor at Carleton College, where he thinks or thought at the time that a Walz resignation would not be a good look and could lead to suspicions of culpability or guilt. I don't know. What do you think of that line of reasoning?
I think people are going to draw lots of conclusions, and they can. But I take the governor at his word, and I've gotten to know him now. What we have seen over these last couple of weeks in Minnesota has been, for me, maybe one of the most despicable chapters of political action that I've ever experienced. The videotape and the efforts by Nick Shirley that were apparently fostered by the Republicans in the Minnesota House and Lisa Damich have caused a lot of harm for families, working families who don't know if they're going to have child care for their kids, and they'll have to choose between their kids and work, for children in child care centers that are locked down because they're getting threats and copycatters at their doors. In this moment when we are reckoning with political violence, the Nick Shirley effort is the kind of thing that sows more seeds of dissent, division, and that ripens political violence. And I can't believe that was the choice made by Republican operatives and perhaps by the Speaker of the House to draw more attention to the issue of fraud. That's not how we solve the problem. That is how we divide Minnesotans. So I have my own perspective. I think that is not worthy of Minnesotans. I think we always have to lead with them in mind. And I think the governor made that choice today. And, as the majority leader of the one and only majority caucus in the legislature right now, I am squarely there. We have work to do for the people of Minnesota. They are struggling with the cost of health care, of child care, of housing, of higher education, and we have to wrap our arms around that. That's where my work is. That's where our caucus is, and we're going to continue to do that.
Leader Murphy, I'm looking at a statement that your office put out just a little bit ago saying that the threats posed by the Trump administration were already dire, and now that he has weaponized his entire government against our state, they are existential. Minnesotans aren't having it. But I wonder if this might send a message that he was able to bully Minnesota's governor into standing down, and as a time when a lot of folks are looking for your party, your followers are looking for your party to stand up.
Well, I think that Minnesotans aren't having the behavior or the tactics of this current president, and they are clear about that in their voices and their protest and their actions. You're going to see, us come back into session on the 17th of February. You're going to see Governor Walz leading the state of Minnesota. I don't think that there's any opportunity here for someone to conclude that the president has bullied people. He likes to bully people, but I think you're going to see Governor Walz continue to stand in his space as a leader and do the work of making sure that Minnesotans' lives are improved.
Do you think, Leader Murphy, that Governor Walz should have jumped out earlier in the process instead of now?
Can you just say that one more time,
Sure.
so I understand what you're asking?
Sure, Senator. Do you think that Governor Walz should have just decided at the get-go, I'm not going to run. I'm just going to stand aside and let somebody else come and take the reins, or at least try to take the reins and run. Do you think he should have done that earlier instead of now?
I think he did a lot of wrestling with the question of running again in the late summer after the assassinations. I think he wrestled a lot with this decision. And frankly, after the shootings at Annunciation, I think it became clear to him that there was more purpose in his fight, and he got into the race. I can only imagine how hard these last weeks have been for him and for his family. As you see the weight of the politics of this president and the White House bearing down, not just on Minnesota, and Minnesotans are taking a beating right now, but on on the governor and on his family. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the second guessing. I am going to make sure that my colleagues here in the Minnesota Senate, the DFL, and the Senate more broadly are, coming into work and showing Minnesotans our commitment to them and to their future.
Leader Murphy, you've run for this office before for governor. In 2018, you were the endorsed candidate, and Tim Walz got the nomination in the primary. Do you have any thoughts about whether you might run for governor in 2026?
Governor Walz and I have a long history. We talk about that a lot together. Today, I think we are, just going to pause. I need to pause. I need to think about my colleagues, our caucus, the work that we're doing to make sure that we grow our majority in the next year's election in 2026. We've got a great path for that, and we're going to do that work. And I will just say one more time that I have never felt more deeply committed to the work of governing with and for the people of Minnesota. Today is a day that we're going to talk about Governor Tim Walz and his choice, and I know he's going to be talking to Minnesotans in just 15 minutes, and I will leave the rest of that political scrum for another day.
But you're not ruling it out, it sounds like.
I really love my job in the Minnesota Senate. I will just say that.
I'm wondering, as you run for re-election, because, of course, all seats are up this year. It's going to be, even before this situation occurred, the governor's decision, we already knew 2026 was going to be a heck of a political year in Minnesota. Your colleague in the House, GOP House Leader Harry Niska, was on social media earlier this morning saying fixing fraud is going to require a full house cleaning, not simply a new face running the same machine that has already lost billions of dollars. And as you run for re-election, what's your response to some of this?
If you were to, go to the computer right now and Google Minnesota Senate Democrats and look at the work that we have done on the issue of fraud and protecting our programs, you would say, oh, God, they have done a lot of work. And since we have taken the majority here in the Minnesota Senate, we have put a lot of work and effort into reforming programs, into giving the governor and the attorney general the authority that they need to attack, prevent, detect fraud. I think we have taken the job very seriously, but it is really boring. Like if you were to look at that list and say, hey, Aaron, you should go out and campaign on those things, you'd laugh at me. We're doing the necessary work of governing. And it isn't sexy. It is important. And you will see us come forward into this next session again with real proposals. The one thing I will say is if you Google the Republicans and ask and see what have they done, it's a blank sheet. They like to talk. They have made this into an issue. I understand that, but they're not doing anything to solve it. And the work that we've experienced, what we've experienced in our lives over these last couple of weeks with childcare, is proof that they're not in a position to govern. They want to play politics with this issue. We want to solve the problem and improve Minnesotans' lives, and that's what we're going to do.
Senator, is there an issue you want the governor to go all in on during his final year in office?
You know, I am pretty sure he's going to be pushing really hard on gun violence prevention. I want to work with him on this issue of the Department of Human Services and what's happened on this issue of fraud so we don't see this again. I am certain that he is going to want to take a look at the budget to make sure that we're in strong position going forward. And I'll wait to hear what else he has to say. But I'm excited to do the work of our last session together. There's a lot to do for the people of Minnesota. I'm all in for that.
Brian asked you, Senator, if you were interested in running. There are names, of course, that are already being bandied about. And as you know, U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar's name is one of them. And she, according to sources, is entertaining the idea. What do you think of that?
You know, we are blessed in Minnesota for some extraordinary leaders, she among them. And I think as we get through this day, and I'll allow Governor Walz his ability to talk to the people of Minnesota, there'll be a lot of conversation about who's running. And if Amy decides to run, I think she'd be an extraordinary candidate. She could be an extraordinary governor. That's tomorrow's story. I'm happy to come back and talk with you about it some more.
All right. Senator Murphy, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
We've been talking to State Senator Erin Murphy, the DFL leader in the state Senate. And of course, you by now have, of course, probably heard the news that Governor Walz not running for re-election. He was trying to go for his historic third consecutive term, and that was an uphill climb just for that. But he's decided to not go in that direction. He's not going to run for re-election. He's outlined some of his reasons for the decision. We're going to hear more about that in the next possibly 15 minutes. He's due to appear before the State Capitol Press Corps at the State Capitol to talk a little bit more about his reasonings. His administration, as you all know, has been at the center of growing allegations of fraud in some state social service programs. He's been attacked by President Trump. There was that viral video shot by conservative content creator Nick Shirley, which ignited a firestorm of criticism. And Brian Baxter, of course, as you know, governors had weeks, if not months, of bad press on this. So that's, of course, some of the reasons that are possibly behind his decision here. So we'll find out a little bit more. We, of course, have a number of guests that we'll be talking to. We've talked to so far this morning. We'll, of course, continue this into the afternoon. Joining us right now, someone who understands the pressures of the job, former Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty is with us right now. Governor, good to hear your voice again.
Good morning to you, Kathy. Good morning to you, Brian. Good to be with you and your NPR listeners.
Thank you for taking the time. So does this come as a surprise to you?
No, I've been predicting this for some weeks. In fact, a mutual friend of all of ours I was with not too long ago, and I said this was not only coming, but I cited the reasons he would cite for leaving. The handwriting was on the wall. The baggage just got to be too heavy, and he needed to pull the ripcord.
Governor, I can't seem to get out of my mind that August of 2024, you were on with Kathy and I as we were talking about the Governor Tim Walz being chosen as the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats. I mean, he was at the top of the political mountain. This fall seemed rather precipitous, didn't it?
Well, governors and people in executive positions that are highly visible are sort of subject to big events, and some of them beyond their control. In fact, when I first met with Governor Walz during his transition for his first term, I said, there's going to be some events that you don't see coming, you can't plan for, that are outside of sort of the normal cadence of policy debates and politics, and they'll probably define your legacy. And he had a lot of them. He had COVID, he had the George Floyd riots, and now he's got this massive fraud scandal.
I'm wondering, I was reading the Fargo Forum, and you were quoted as saying that 2026 might be the Minnesota Republicans' best chance to win the governor's office back. And I'm wondering if you think that's still the case, given that Governor Walz is now out of the picture.
Kathy, one of your colleagues that I think you respect, Tom Hauser, is indicating that Amy Klobuchar is likely or very likely to run. If that turns out to be true, that's going to fundamentally change the governor's race in Minnesota. She would be a very, very formidable candidate in that race. And so it changes everything.
On the same thought process here, are Republicans going to be able to escape the president's shadow? I mean, this was turning into a referendum on who do you like least, Governor Tim Walz or President Donald Trump. Now one of them is out of the picture, as Kathy mentioned. How are Republicans going to adjust to this?
Well, I think, Brian, for Republicans to win in Minnesota, you need at least three things. A neutral macro political environment. That's number one. Number two, you need really good candidates. And number three, you have to have some DFL mistakes. And so I think we've got the last two of those three. And I don't know what the macro environment's going to be next year, nor does anybody.
This year.
Relative to Trump, this year, relative to Trump and the economy and related political issues. So we'll see about all of that. But I do think, depending on what Senator Klobuchar does, it's going to be a very important inflection point. And then to your point about, what happens next with the Republicans, we'll just have to wait and see what Senator Klobuchar does. The fraud issue, Governor Walz's strategy was going to be to say he's going to make it a referendum on Trump. And of course, we were going to make it a referendum on fraud. So it would be interesting to see how that would have played out, and still can play out in part. It just won't be as potent as an issue for Republicans going forward.
Well, which Republicans maybe are or should be reassessing their candidacy at this point?
Oh, there's a bunch of them. There's almost a dozen candidates. Most of them are going to run out of money by spring. A few of them might stick around and have enough money to run in primary, or think they could beat Klobuchar. I think it depends almost entirely on whether Senator Klobuchar runs or not. If she doesn't run, I think it's still game on. If she does run, I think a number of those candidates will fade away over the next 6 months.
Do you think, there was, as I mentioned, there was so much effort. The attacks on the governor and his administration were pretty harsh, with the president joining in the attacks and just the attention over this. And I'm wondering, efforts. There were, of course, Republican lawmakers saying that Governor Walz should resign now that he's out of the picture. Is it maybe as case of Republicans maybe? You got to be careful what you wish for, because, as you say, it depends on what happens with Senator Klobuchar. But it sounds as though you're thinking that the Republicans' best chances of winning the governor's seat are dimmed.
I think it, again, depends on whether Senator Klobuchar runs or not. If it's some other Democrat, and, they are prone to make a lot of interesting mistakes in who they endorse and nominate as well. So I think it fundamentally depends on what Senator Klobuchar is going to do. If she doesn't run, I think we still have a very good chance. And if she does run, we still might have a chance. It's going to be very uphill. And as to the fraud allegations, they don't go away. I mean, this is something that is going to go on because federal investigations at the U.S. Attorney's Office, all the federal agencies are investigating. The state has its own audit report coming out in January. The legislative auditor and the legislature is going to have more to say about this. So this is going to remain a centerpiece issue. And it would have been easier for Republicans had it been Walz stayed in the race. But the issue itself is still very potent and is still going to be around regardless of which Democrat runs. I'm
just curious, because you've spent time in that office, Harry Niska, the GOP House leader, says that, this is the result of nearly 2 decades of Democratic governors creating kind of a culture of, is his words, complacency that has cost billions of dollars on the case of Minnesota taxpayers. How, if you were governor, how would you fix this situation? What is it about our system, if I could kind of take a little bit of a deviation here, what is it about the system that we have here in Minnesota that has caused all these problems?
Elected officials, particularly in the executive branch, have to hold agencies and the programs accountable. And you can't check everything every day, but one of the recurring themes in almost every fraud case is people failing to check. And there was years' worth of legislative auditor warnings, reports, and keep in mind things like the legislative auditor saying the Walz administration had a quote-unquote shoot the messenger mentality. You had people in the Department of Human Services refusing to cooperate, allegedly, with BCA agents when they were investigating fraud all the way back into 2018 because they didn't want to, quote unquote, enable law enforcement or be a tool of law enforcement. These statements are a reflection of a terrible culture within that bureaucracy, and the Walz administration was responsible for holding them accountable for better outcomes and a better attitude and a better outlook than what I've just described.
Governor Pawlenty, obviously the president has made it almost a personal project to weaken Governor Tim Walz. And just over the weekend, he posted something related to the assassination of Melissa Hortman, suggesting that Tim Walz was somehow involved or directed it. Why haven't we heard Republicans come out and say something about that? Republicans running for office?
I've said something about that in past months when I've been on cable TV shows when people have brought that up. I think allegations that Governor Walz is somehow behind the assassination of Representative Hortman are despicable. I mean, that is not true. There's no evidence to support that, and it's bizarre, ridiculous, and terrible that people would even say that.
But shouldn't some of these Republicans running for governor show some courage and say something about it like you just did?
Yes.
And why do you think they aren't? Just curious.
I think they would. I haven't gone through and see if they've been asked it and if they've responded, but I can't imagine that the bulk of the people running for governor wouldn't say something similar to what I just said.
All right. Before you go, Governor, and I know you're busy, and I really appreciate your time, what are you going to be watching?
I'm really not that busy, Kathy. No, I'm not that busy. I got more time.
I'm glad you're talking to us. Before you go, what are you going to be watching for? You've got good political instincts. What are you be watching for here in the weeks to come?
Yeah, I think the main thing here is going to be what Senator Klobuchar decides to do, and the rest of it is just going to flow from that.
All right. Governor Tim Pawlenty, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
That's former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, who served a number of years in office, not only as governor, but also in the state legislature. Interesting hearing from him, Brian Baxt.
Yeah, especially the point he made about why there's been silence about some of the comments that the president has made. That was kind of interesting to me. And
of course, as he said, we do have to wait to see what Senator Klobuchar decides to do. I was digging through some information just because that's kind of who I am, I guess, Secretary of State's office election information. And boy, Senator Klobuchar's margins of victory over the years have been pretty impressive. 65% margin of victory back in 2012, 2024, 56% margin of victory. I mean, she would be a formidable candidate should she decide to run.
And she's a campaigner. She gets around the state. She shows up to events, and as we mentioned, all 87 counties every year. She makes a point of doing that. So it's not like she's just dropping by to ask for votes all the time. She's visiting projects and so forth. So I think that Democrats will probably lean into that she's the senator
Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll see what happens. Although, there was a caller. I was listening to Kat Richards and the call-in program we had last hour, and the caller said something about, but, I wonder, is Senator Klobuchar complicit in this fraud scheme in that she should have called Walz out on it? Is that some kind of a potentially potent argument to make?
And some of her allies are already making the counter argument that she's got a record as a prosecutor and took on fraudsters and white collar criminals and pursued that. So she's probably not as susceptible to that as maybe somebody who's in the state house right now. Obviously, being out in Washington, there's a whole new set of issues. I just want to mention that this press conference that's going to start at the top of the hour, Dana Ferguson is reporting that the room is really packed and staffers of Governor Tim Walz are lining up behind. He had held a meeting of his staffers just before this. So I'm sure he broke the news to them in a personal fashion, not just the statement that we've read, ahead of this statement that he's going to make at 11 o'clock.
I also understand that Dana saw a couple state commissioners come out of the office.
Yeah.
And he's probably, as you say, he's told any number of different people what he plans to do.
Absolutely. And, there's some big things happening right now. This paid family leave program that was so important to Tim Walz launched last week. And his, one of the commissioners that came out of his office is in charge of that. Tom Peterson, the ag commissioner, who's respected on both sides of the aisle, has been dealing a lot with the farm issues and the tariff stuff. So there's still a lot of work to do. Tim Walz is not leaving office today. He's got a full 12 months left, and so he's going to probably have his work cut out for him, even though he doesn't have to worry about the political stakes.
I was interested to see what Senator Murphy had to say about what she thought he would lean into in this session that's upcoming. I see we have the 2-minute warning has officially been given. A spokesperson for the governor just came to the podium to say 2 minutes. So what I'm going to do right now is take a break. You're listening to NPR News.
From all of us at NPR News, Happy New Year. And to everyone who financially supported NPR News this past year, thank you. You help bring local news to everyone in our region. You lift up community voices. And you create real connection in a world that needs it. NPR News is powered by people, and that means you. We're grateful you're with us, and we can't wait to share more meaningful stories and trusted journalism in the year ahead.
By the way, for more on all of this, and there's a lot to digest, I know, go to nprnews.org, click on politics. Brian and his team have done excellent work here over the past many weeks and months on this story. And of course, they've got a lot to talk about and a lot to cover here. We are waiting for Governor Tim Walz live news conference here at NPR News 91.1 KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Partly cloudy skies. It's 31 degrees at 11 o'clock. And we are in the midst of live coverage. I'm Kathy Wurzer. I'm glad you're with us. Brian Bakst, Minnesota Public Radio politics editor, with me as well. We've been talking since about 8 o'clock this morning. Brian has been bird-dogging the story of Governor Tim Walz deciding not to run for a third term. He's going to bow out. There was a lot of speculation about this, and he is going to make it official here in the next minute or so. We're going to take live coverage of this news conference from the state capitol.
And the starting gate for Democrats who want to get in is probably already a couple hours ago. So even though they might not be declaring their candidacies today, a lot of them are gearing up, or some of them are gearing up, and everybody's watching, as Governor Tim Pawlenty mentioned, Amy Klobuchar. She could be the difference maker in the race.
I also, of course, would love to hear from some of the Republicans in the race as well. We hope to hear from House Speaker Lisa Damuth. Here's Governor Tim Walz coming to the podium.
Well, good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. Like many Minnesotans, I have to tell you, I was glad to turn the page on 2025. It was an extraordinarily difficult year for our state, and it ended on a particularly sour note. For the last several years, an organized group of criminals have sought to take advantage of this state's generosity. And even as we make progress in the fight against the fraudsters, we now see an organized group of political actors seeking to take advantage of a crisis. I don't want to mince words here. Donald Trump and his allies in Washington and in St. Paul and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family. They've already begun trying to withhold funds that were meant to help families afford child care. And they have no intention of stopping there. Make no mistake, we should be concerned about fraud in our state government. We cannot effectively deliver programs and services if we can't earn the public's trust. That's why over the past few years, we've made systemic changes in the way we do business. We've gone to the legislature time and time again to get more tools to combat fraud. We've fired people who weren't doing their jobs. We've seen people go to jail for stealing from our state. We've cut off whole streams of funding in partnership with the federal government, where we saw widespread criminal activity. We've put new locks on the doors of our remaining programs, and we've hired a new head of program integrity to make sure that those locks can't be broken. All across this state, Minnesotans are hard at work on this problem. Advocates, administrators, investigators are on the front lines defending the integrity of our state's programs, and I want to give a very heartfelt thank you to all of them. There is more to do. A single taxpayer dollar wasted on fraud should be intolerable. And while there's a role to play for everyone, from the legislature to prosecutors to insurance companies to local and county government, the buck does stop with me. My administration has been taking fast, decisive action to solve this crisis. We'll win the fight against the fraudsters. But the political gamesmanship we're seeing from Republicans is only making that fight harder. We've got Republicans here in the state legislature playing hide and seek with potential whistleblowers. We've got conspiracy theorist right-wing YouTubers breaking into our daycares, demanding access to our children. We've got the President of the United States demonizing our Somali neighbors and wrongfully confiscating funds that Minnesotans rely on. It's disgusting and it's dangerous. Republicans are playing politics with the future of this state. It's shameful. And I've said it before, and I will continue to say it. We welcome ideas from anyone, in any party, from any walk of life, who wants to help us continue to stay ahead of these criminals. And we welcome the involvement of the federal government. I am grateful to the career professionals at the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI who have been helping us fight this fight for years. But I cannot abide the actions of the political leadership in Washington. These opportunists are willing to hurt our people to score cheap points. They and their allies have no intention of helping us solve this problem, and every intention of trying to profit off of it, which
going to work on his job that he was elected to do rather than run for another term in that job. And
He's back. Governor Tim Walz.
to meet this moment. Minnesota has always come first and always will. That's what I believe servant leadership demands of me. As an optimist, I'll hold out some hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will consider what servant leadership demands of them in the moment. We can work together to combat against the criminals. We can work together to rebuild the public's trust and make our state stronger. But make no mistake about it. A Democratic and a DFLer will hold this seat come November. I'm confident that I'll find ways to contribute to the state that I love long after next January. But there'll be time to worry about all that later. Today, I'm proud of the work we've done to make Minnesota America's best place to live and raise kids. From our new paid leave policy to our child tax credit to our school lunch programs feeding every single child. And I'm doubly proud of the incredible team we put together to make this vision a reality. I want to take a moment to thank every member of my staff, to every single state employee who has been part of this fight. Now more than ever, I need you on the job. I need you to help work together to tackle the important work in front of us. And most of all, I want Minnesotans to know how grateful I am for the opportunity to serve this state, for the privilege that I have been given to serve in this office. I'm on the job. I'm focused on making sure that we stay America's best place to live and raise kids. No one will take that away from us. I'm proud of the way we treat our neighbors. I'm proud of the way that we welcome people to this state. I'm proud of the way that we innovate. And I'm proud of the way that we are optimists for the future. No one's taking this away from us. Not the fraudsters. Certainly not this president. Not on my watch. Tomorrow, I'll be back with you. I'll give you an update on America's best paid family medical leave program that is now a week into it. And at that time, I'll take all your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, press. Thanks, folks. More tomorrow. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Little surprised that Governor Walz not taking questions from those gathered in the reception room at the state capitol. Brian Baxt, he pretty much, as you say, read through his statement that that was released earlier this morning talked a lot about the political actors that have, as he said, he's blamed the governor, blamed the president. He says, though, that the buck stops with me, and took a little bit of responsibility. But I'm wondering what you think of.
Well, it was very defiant in tone,
It
right? It
was.
was the president has brought havoc on the state because of me and because of some of this stuff. Obviously, a lot of these investigations are into real allegations of fraud. Not all of them have been, but some of them are. And so he said that he's going to spend his time focusing on getting fraud out of government, because he said even $1 of fraud is intolerable. The governor, as you noted, didn't take any questions, so we really didn't know much more about what he was thinking as he was arriving at the decision, who he was talking to, what he might do in terms of trying to put a thumb on the scale if he's going to try to endorse somebody or if he sees somebody as his natural successor. There were a lot of questions that I'm sure people will continue to try to find answers to, and he said he'll be back tomorrow to talk about that paid family leave program that we said, because that was something he was entering the year hoping to really prop up and use as a, here's something tangible that we got you, Minnesota, and now it's almost an afterthought in a lot of this fraud conversation.
Right. And if you're tuning in, Governor Walz has dropped his bid for re-election. We have live special coverage that we're in the midst of. Brian Baxt, our politics editor, is with me here in studio. Dana Ferguson, of course, is at the Capitol, and she was part of that news conference. She had a look at some of the Capitol staffers, Walz's staffers who were behind him. Gwen Walz, First Lady Gwen Walz, was also in attendance. We'll have to ask Dana about that, too.
Yeah, she said she was tearing up as the governor spoke. Obviously, this has been a difficult decision that the Walz family has talked through over the last several weeks. And going back to summer where he was considering whether to actually even enter this race, it was...
I wonder if his heart was in it.
That's the question that a lot of people are having is did you do it because you thought you had to serve some sort of end goal of not making the party have a wide open race, or did you do it because you really wanted 4 more years? He was asking for 4 more years, but really not articulating what he would have done with those 4 years.
And, it was interesting how he shrugged off concerns of other DFLers, because there were these quiet murmurs of concern among some DFLers that the fraud was, the allegations were growing, the national spotlight was getting hotter, and he tried to shrug those off. There were, of course, concerns that this was a political liability, and but evidently, from his statement too, he thinks he could have won had he run.
Says he thinks he could have won. Obviously. We will never know, because that won't be something that voters will get the chance to vote on, and him clearing the way just really kind of makes it a moot point. But you're right. He was, a lot of lawmakers over this time since he came back from the vice presidential run were wondering, is this the same Tim Walz? Can we get access to him? Is he working with us, or is he maybe working on some Tim Walz image things to keep open the option of potentially running again for a national office? We don't know whether this is the true end of the political line for Tim Walz. He's 61. That's young by today's political standards. But there's really not many offices in Minnesota that he has expressed an interest in. And on the national level, who knows what will happen? Potentially a Democrat gets elected in 2028. He's maybe a cabinet choice. I don't know. That's a long ways off.
Sure.
But for now, Tim Walz is going to serve 1 more year and then be looking for a job.
Getting back to some of his poll numbers, I was thinking about this too, Brand Bax. There was the recent KSTP Survey USA poll that came out in, I think that was December, that showed that he had a 48-48 disapproval reading on that poll. 48% approved of his job performance and 48% disapproved. I mean, that was below the 50% threshold that you want to see for a candidate.
Right. But at the same time, it was almost a year out, and there was no named challenger, right? So these races are run against somebody, and Republicans still have to figure out who they're going to run for this office, and now Democrats too, obviously. And there's going to be a lot of factors, and just the pace of the news cycle. I mean, if you just think about it, what we're talking about today might not be what we're talking about tomorrow, next week, certainly not 11 months from now. So it's the environment we're in is just so dynamic. It's really hard to say where this is headed.
Dana Ferguson is joining us. Of course, she has been at the Capitol with the Capitol Press Corps and was in the audience as the governor read his statement. Dana, what'd you think?
You know, it was very brief, and I think we were all a little bit surprised that there weren't any questions taken about why the governor and his family decided to make this decision. I'm sure you heard quickly after his statement wrapped up, they said, thank you, goodbye, and it sounds like the soonest we'll be able to get some more answers about why he decided on this will be tomorrow at a separate news conference.
Okay.
What was
I
the
should
mood
say,
like in the
too-
room there, Dana?
Yeah, I was going to say just packed with a number of reporters. Some folks had to sit on the floor. There weren't enough seats for everyone. A number of the governor's staffers were there lining the back of the room. First Lady Gwen Walz was there. She was tearing up as the governor was reading this statement. It was clear that this was not something that was easy for them, and they were having a sort of emotional reaction to delivering this news.
I know you're busy. Have you had a chance? You noted that there were a couple of state commissioners who were coming out of the office prior to the news conference. Did you have a chance to talk to any of them?
That's right. Yes, I stopped and spoke with Ag Commissioner Tom Peterson and Deed Commissioner Matt Verlick. They were a little bit somber coming out of that cabinet meeting. They'd talked to the governor and his staff about this. They said it was a long weekend as they were sort of navigating this news along with news coming from the federal administration about some funding that's been suspended to Minnesota child cares and small businesses. So just a lot of processing going on, and they just seemed a little bit sort of to be working through a lot of it, not 100% sure what to say.
Dana, even usually at these momentous press conferences, there are a lot of folks who kind of gather outside of the governor's office in that hallway, perhaps
Right.
people of the other party or even allies of the governor. Did we see any of that?
I didn't see any allies outside of the governor's office today. There were some individuals who were associated with the viral video that went up now 2 weeks ago. They were claiming credit, at least online, for the governor making this decision to step down. Just a reminder for folks that there was a content creator that came to Minnesota, was knocking on the doors of some Somali-owned daycare centers in Minneapolis and making allegations about fraud with child care assistance payments, not necessarily proving all of the allegations that were out there, but the individuals who were involved in that were sitting outside of the governor's office and just sort of waiting to see what happened. I think for folks who were not in the press conference, they were also very surprised at how brief it was and just that there weren't additional answers about why this is happening.
To your point here, Dana, I see that Nick Shirley, who was the main focus of that viral video, says he was tweeted this out in capital letters. I ended Tim Walz. So taking credit for that, I guess.
Right. And the governor mentioned that, you know, there were some external focuses from the feds and from others that came in recent weeks looking at this fraud, but not really providing any substantiation to the claim that it was because of that video that he made this choice.
And Dana, more about the optics of this. You know, this governor, when he came in, he was known for kind of straying off script or doing a state of the state address with just kind of bullet points. He pretty much went word for word through this statement that he issued earlier. It seems like he put some thought into what he wanted to say and didn't really want to go off script.
It did, and I would agree with you in covering the governor through various previous addresses or comments at news conferences, that kind of thing. For a long time, he just wouldn't even have any sort of script. It would be talking points, if that, or just stream of consciousness as he's delivering these speeches or different things. And to see him really stick word by word was different and just a change in tone from what we're used to.
This is the first time we've seen and heard the governor since what, December 23rd? I mean, he hasn't done a lot of press.
Right, yes. The last time that he had a public appearance was at Shiloh Temple in Minneapolis back just before Christmas Eve, talking about some of the potential ramp up in immigration enforcement actions. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and I think folks, especially as the conversation about fraud has drummed up quite a bit with the federal focus on Minnesota, have been wanting to hear from the governor. Instead, we have heard from commissioners at the Department of Human Services, investigators, others, but this is the first time that he has really spoken amid a lot of that.
And usually the governor does year-end interviews. I mean, extensive, long-form interviews with members of the Capitol Press Corps, and that didn't happen this year.
No, we didn't have that this year. We really haven't had extensive conversations with the governor in, I would say, probably months. Just, it seems as though over the past few months, as federal officials have had a really focused eye on Minnesota, that he's been consumed with trying to keep up with all of the letters and the request for him to testify and everything, and still just trying to do the job here of running the state of Minnesota.
And Dana, where it goes from here for Tim Walz, he does have almost 12 months left in this office. Later this month, I think he's obligated to put his construction projects plan out for legislative consideration. It's a short session. What are we
It's a bonding year.
It's a bonding year. What are we expecting out of the session, given kind of all that has transpired with the governor and all the people who want to be governor?
Yeah, I think we knew even before today that it was going to be messy, just because everybody is running for something, whether it's their legislative office, higher office, something else. And now it changes the dynamic. It potentially could be a little bit less combative between Republicans in the legislature and the governor's office, though I anticipate we're still going to hear Republicans especially really keep on with the issue of fraud in state government programs and their desire to want to fix it and bringing forth some sort of solutions for what that might look like. And two of the leading Republican candidates are going to be in the House chamber, so we'll have to see what that dynamic is like between Representatives Lisa Dameth, who's the House Speaker, and Representative Kristen Robbins, who leads the anti-fraud committee in that chamber.
And a third one, Representative Peggy Bennett from Albert Lee is announcing her candidacy today in the Department of Bad Timing, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, I saw that. Not great timing. By the way, speaking of potential candidates, I was talking off air a couple of hours ago and was wondering, kind of musing whether former DFL Congressman Dean Phillips would be interested in running. And he officially says no intention to run for governor or U.S. Senate. And he says, I stand at the ready, though, to assist common sense candidates committed to reducing the cost of living, improving education and public safety, addressing corruption, and restoring competency in governance.
And Dana,
and I expect we'll see more of that, right? Folks saying whether they're sticking with whatever lane that they're in, planning to continue running for offices like Attorney General, Secretary of State, Senate, anything else, or if there might be some sort of lane changing going on.
Yeah, Dana, I was going to ask, because we had Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy on, and she said today is Tim Walz Day. She didn't really answer the question as to whether she's giving any thought to it. How long do we expect the line to be?
At least for now, it doesn't seem very long. The only candidate that we've really heard is considering it is U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. Obviously, it's still very fresh and surprising news, so that could very well change. And there's a lot of time before they go to convention in May and make a decision about who's going to get the party endorsement.
It sounds as though we talked to DFL Party Chair Richard Karlbaum earlier this morning.
Hours ago.
I know, it just seems like days ago. And clearly they're going to go through the process, and there's no coronation planned, if that makes sense. I mean, that seems to be the message that we're hearing.
And talk a little bit about this process. What are the early blocks in this long race?
Yeah, so we'll see caucuses next month. I believe it's on February 3rd. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
And then starting to have additional conversations, candidates with delegates who are going to be making decisions around endorsements come the end of May. And from there, we'll have to see if candidates abide by the party endorsement or decide to go on to a primary in August. We've heard from a number of candidates on the Republican side that if they don't win the party endorsement, they're planning to move on to a primary in August. It'll be really interesting to see if any of those candidates drop out after this news that the governor is not planning to run again, or if they, similar to Democrats, sort of look to change lanes, run for a different office than they were initially seeking. And I don't know, the whole thing, it just really redefines the year in Minnesota politics to have the governor make this decision today.
You know, there was a time back when I was a young political reporter when things were so quiet, and we would just traditional, and we would do a legislative session, and there might be some squabbling, and then things were fine.
That's so novel.
It is
nonstop.
Dana Ferguson, thank you so much. We're going to send you back down to the basement here, and you can file your story. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dana Ferguson, one of our political reporters. Now, if you're tuning in, it's 11:24. And we are spending a lot of time talking about Minnesota politics. Why? Because Governor Tim Walz has decided not to run for a third term. He appeared before the State Capitol Press Corps about 25 minutes ago, read from a statement that he issued earlier this morning, kind of outlining some of his reasons that he was not going to run for re-election, and talked about how there's this organized group of political actors out there that are undermining and kind of focusing on fraud in the state of Minnesota. He blames President Trump and other supporters for dividing Minnesota, for hurting Minnesotans. And he says also that defended his administration, saying we've done a lot to battle fraud, but there's more to do. To your point here, Brian Bax, that this session, the 2026 session, will focus a lot on fraud, obviously. And but he said that the buck stops with me, and decided to drop out of the race. And so that's why we're talking about who might be in the wings, who might want to run now on the DFL side, and what happens on the Republican side.
Yeah, those are big questions, right? This year seemed like it was going to be set up as a referendum on Tim Walz and a referendum on Donald Trump. It's a midterm election. The president's party is usually facing some headwinds, and so there was kind of an even score there. Now does it revert to more historic patterns where the Republicans are going to be climbing up a taller hill than maybe the Democrats? We don't know that yet.
Right.
There's a lot of time between now and November. There's a lot that will depend on who gets these nominations. There's some very, very different types of personalities and policy-driven ideas among all the candidates. They're all not selling the same thing. They're all talking about fraud, but they're also talking about different ways to lead the state forward. So we'll have to watch that. Maybe this will give room for other issues to bubble up and get more attention than they might have if it was all about how did you do on fraud, Tim Walz.
I think we should talk to a couple of political insiders, folks who this is their life. They talk about this all the time. So we've got two of the best. Joining us right now is Todd Rapp. You, of course, know Todd. He's president and CEO of Rapp Strategies. He's a DFL strategist. Todd, good to hear you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Todd. Preya Samsunder is also with us. Preya is a political analyst and GOP strategist. Preya, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I think I will start with Preya, and I'm curious to hear from you, Preya. When you first heard the news this morning that Governor Walz was not going for a third term, what did you think?
I mean, first of all, I really wasn't surprised. I think nobody is, just kind of looking at the mass of news and content that just keeps coming out day after day. This is not a one-time issue with the fraud. It seems like we're hearing new amounts. We're hearing new fraud stories every single day. And I've said it before and I said it again. This is not going away anytime soon. I think the U.S. Attorney's Office has barely just scratched the surface in terms of the level of fraud that really has amassed our state. I think it's going to be a problem through the general election and beyond. So it really isn't surprising. On the other hand, it was kind of disappointing because, look, as somebody who's done GOP politics in this state for over a decade at this point, I recognize that Tim Walz was our best chance to flip the state, flip the governor's seat, and elect a Republican. And knowing that somebody gets to come in, and yes, we do have the argument of, I don't think this is just a referendum on Tim Walz. As Brian mentioned a few minutes earlier, I think what this is a referendum on DFL leadership, having a lock on state government for 20 years. And really, that's when a lot of this fraud has amassed. You're going to have a fresh face coming in and saying, well, I've had no business with any of this. This wasn't my doing. This is what I am looking at forward. And I think that the fraud argument will continue to be a top talking point for Republicans. But to Brian's point, it does become a little bit harder because you're not dealing with the coach in the seat anymore with Tim Walz. You are dealing with a fresh face who has the ability to take a step back and say, well, this wasn't my problem, it was his.
Todd, you travel around the state quite a bit and are involved in some polling in your consulting arrangement. So you've done some polling on Tim Walz over the years. How durable has he been, and have you seen any erosion in that?
Well, he's been very durable. That's true. But I think what we've seen over the last, maybe 3 or 4 months, at least in the polling that I've seen, is the problem that's going to come when you run for a third term. Let's remember, Minnesota, we don't embrace people running for governor or mayor for a third term very easily. It's one of the things that made Jacob Fry's victory so somewhat surprising. The question becomes, what's next for you? And I'm not sure that in any polling that I've seen, at least, that people really understood from the governor, what did he want to do over the next 4 years that he couldn't get done over the last 8? So if you haven't really answered that question yet, now all of a sudden the fraud issue continues to emerge and emerges even more. And then all of a sudden you're only talking about that issue if you're out talking with people as opposed to talking about what your vision is. That makes things pretty difficult. This was still a pretty close race either way, and his approval ratings have continued to be certainly at a level that you could have won. But boy, I wonder if he really, he spent 18 months on the national stage. He spent 18 months going after the president, and I just really wonder whether or not he had really kind of thought about the calculation of what it was going to take to overcome that hill that Minnesotans tend to have about somebody serving for longer than 8 years in the governor's office.
Did he make a mistake, Todd, in kind of going tit for tat with President Trump, who is known to kind of really smother his enemies as much as he can? Did they miscalculate there and invite President Trump to take much more of an active interest in Minnesota than maybe Tim Walz would have liked?
Well, I don't know if it's a mistake. That kind of depends on what your goals are. There's no question that we've had a target on us, and in part that was because Governor Walz has been such a strong critic of the president. I will say, though, that in Minnesota, the argument that he's been making about the president has been great for the base, and it's been incredibly important for Governor Walz especially to continue the support he gets in places like Hennepin and Ramsey County if he was going to run again. But there's also this feeling in Minnesota of, okay, we get it, you're having this debate on the national stage, but what are you going to do for us back here? And it's not a very logical thing, it's an emotional thing, but I do wonder sometimes when people are watching what our governor is doing, how much they care about that he engages in that national debate versus, okay, what about our schools? What about our health care? What about continued transportation funding and so on? And, and it's hard to measure that right now because I don't think we've ever gone through anything quite like what we've been going through over the last year here in Minnesota.
Same question to Preya. Preya, did Governor Walz make a mistake going toe-to-toe with President Trump?
Look, I think that Tim Walz going after President Trump was always going to be in the cards, regardless of whether the fraud was part of the issue or not. Like, the reality is that this going after Trump in a midterm is the DFL playbook. It's not exclusive to Minnesota alone. It is something that, to Todd's point, it really riles up their base. It gets them excited and energized. And that is what the base likes to see. They really do make the midterm elections all about Donald Trump and hoping that if they focus on him, they don't have to focus on the issues here at home. And I think on the flip side, Tim Walz would have always been a focus for Donald Trump because Tim Walz was the VP candidate running for re-election here in Minnesota. There was always that national bug. And, in reading Walz's statement earlier, he talked about, Minnesota being his job, his first priority. But the reality is that Democrats and folks in the state were already annoyed with him even before the fraud stuff started popping up nationally, because he was still riding the high from the presidential run. And was traveling around the state during session when things were happening that needed his attention. He was too busy focusing on other states and other national Democrat priorities to really focus at home. And you were hearing the rumors everywhere and the grumbles everywhere that folks were already upset with him about that. And so I think the proof was I think the writing was on the wall, not the proof was in the pudding, but the writing was on the wall that things were getting more contentious. I think fraud just kind of busted it wide open.
Say, Todd Rapp, there are a lot of people in the DFL party who want their politicians to fight, right? Get in there and fight. And that's what Tim Walz tried to do. Yet he's quitting. He's leaving the race now. Does it look like the president has won?
Well, I think, Kathy, if folks are thinking about this in terms of 200 characters or something, that's probably a good description. I mean, I think in the bigger picture is that it's complicated to run for governor, and it's more complicated to run for a third term, and it's even more complicated that you have engaged in this big national debate to the extent that Governor Walz has. And I think there's a lot of complicated things that come together. And I'm not sure he had an opportunity to piece all of this together until this holiday season. And it sounds like that's what he did. And he sat down with his family and he looked at the pros and cons and he said, is it worth it for us as a family? And is it worth it for the state of Minnesota? Or should we step out of the way and let another Democrat go forward? That's pretty complicated. I would just say that anyone who tries to out there on the internet tries to break this down into winning or losing, it's just not going to be that simple.
Perea campaigns are about winning or losing, and obviously this changes the race. Governor Tim Pawlenty, the former Republican governor, last Republican to win statewide, was with us a little while earlier, and he said if Senator Amy Klobuchar gets in as the Democratic candidate, that's game over, potentially for Republicans. You have a field, I think 13, maybe growing to 14 today. What is the profile of the candidate you think your party needs to at least give yourself a chance?
We're going to need somebody that can be a unifier, right? Not just within the base, but can be a unifier statewide. The reality is to my point earlier, is that it shouldn't be just a referendum on Tim Walz alone. Is he in charge when all of this came together? Absolutely. But the reality is the fraud is a much longer process that has been going on years. And my guess is probably even before Walz got into office. The culmination of it just happened under his watch. We need somebody who can come in and unify, that can really talk about the issues that matter most to Minnesotans, which right now is fraud, affordability, talking about education, infrastructure, and everything else under the sun. If you can have a strong Republican ticket that can go out there, talk about these issues in a way that touches Minnesotans, that can bring them together and allow families a sense that we can move forward in a way that is going to tackle the crime, that is going to recoup our money, and that is going to invest back into the people of Minnesota, I think you absolutely have a ticket that can compete. Will it be harder with someone like Klobuchar in the ballot? Absolutely. But as we know, open seats are not a given for anyone, even if they are a staunch incumbent that's been in office for 20 years at a different level. It's not a guarantee. The reality is this all happened under the Democrats' watch. It happened under their leadership, and regardless of whoever that Democrat candidate is, they still have to answer for their party and the policies that they put in place that allowed this to happen.
Just about 10 minutes ago, Senator Amy Klobuchar put a statement on the social media site X saying that Governor Tim Walz made the difficult decision to focus on his job and the challenges facing our state rather than campaigning and running for re-election. He has always dedicated his career to delivering for Minnesota, and his impact will be felt for generations to come. And she goes on to say he's a true public servant. What's not there is I'm running, but we do know from sources close to the senator that she is giving it serious consideration.
Say, Priya, if Senator Klobuchar decides to run, and that would be a big decision, obviously, I'm wondering, do some candidates then change lanes or just decide, maybe this is not my opportunity to run at this point?
I think Republicans, regardless, just need to take a hard look at the governor's race now that Tim Walz has gotten out. The reality is that Tim Walz was our best chance to flip the governor's seat. That is no longer on the table, regardless of who gets in. We've heard even before Tim Walz had announced, Amy Klobuchar was considering Steve Simon, Keith Ellison. Regardless of who gets in, regardless of who that candidate is, the game has now changed. The path has now changed, and we need to take a hard look at this race and realize that we need to start consolidating and figuring out who is going to be the candidate to take on this new candidate, because it's not going to be as easy or as simple as it was when Tim Walz was in office.
And Todd, what about
and on the ballot?
Todd, what about the minefield facing your party? I mean, is it presumed that Amy Klobuchar would be the nominee, or are you expecting these fractures that we've seen all around the country between kind of the hard left, the Democratic Socialists, and the more or less center-left types? Do you expect that to show itself here?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Minnesota, because now we have 2 open seats at the top of the ballot. And we have not had both a Senate and a governor's race be open seats for a long, long time in the state. So we're going to get a lot of politics here over the next year. I think if Senator Klobuchar gets in, she would be a presumptive favorite to win at the convention, in part because the debate you're talking about is playing out in the U.S. Senate race between Peggy Flanagan and Angie Craig, kind of the split inside the party. And I would guess there would be a unification effort around Senator Klobuchar, given that she has been a double-digit or more winner in her 4 races thus far. Having said that, there are certainly reasons that whoever the candidate ends up being, they're going to have to be cautious around the fraud issue. Because, as you can tell, Republicans are going to try very hard to paint any candidate with that. Now, that's not been something that in Minnesota's worked very well. When there have been ethics problems at the Capitol, typically they affect particular legislators and not entire legislative caucuses. Typically speaking, this type of issue would not affect all the party, particularly somebody who's in Washington who can just turn around and say, do you want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about the president for a little while. So I think what we're going to see is that issue is going to become less and less important. And now it's going to be back to a very interesting battle, largely determined in the suburbs, about the direction Minnesota should go. Should it continue to go the way that Governor Walz was taking it policy-wise, or should it go a different direction? And we're going to do it, like I say, with 2 open seats. It's going to be really interesting, and I think it's going to be fun for political observers.
Say, to both of you, we were talking to Senator Erin Murphy right before the governor's news conference about the upcoming session, and she said, yes, we're going to focus on fraud. And the governor, in his remarks, said, I'm still on the job. I got stuff to do, right? And I'm wondering, with the legislature the way it is, what really can be done in this 2026 session around some of these hot-button issues? Priya?
I think Tim Walz, if he's going to have any hope of trying to remedy this issue, he's going to have to work with Republicans. That's the bottom line. He's going to have to throw some concessions around, which is going to be painful for him because it really will help elevate some of these Republicans who are running for governor at the end of the day. I think Republicans are going to keep their nose to the grindstone and do what they have been doing, which is continuing to investigate fraud, continuing to speak with folks within the various departments and continue to have conversations about what actually is the depth of this fraud in our state. How do we go about fixing it and recouping the billions of dollars that have been stolen from taxpayers? And then how do we move forward? So I think Republicans are going to largely stay in the same lane, doing what they're doing, making sure that they're actually figuring out the depth of this fraud and how do we move forward and how do we fix this. And I think Tim Walz is going to have to play a bit more of a conciliatory role here, where he's going to have to work with Republicans. It can't just be the DFL show, because as we figured this out, the DFL has been in charge when all of these problems have occurred, and they really haven't had a good solution as to like how to curb the problem or at least stem the bleeding.
Preya, Todd mentioned this open U.S. Senate seat, and if Amy Klobuchar runs and wins, we potentially have 2 freshman senators starting 2027. But the big political story a lot of people were waiting for as the calendar turned into 2026 was whether Michelle Tafoya would throw her name in for that U.S. Senate seat that's on the ballot in 2026. What are you hearing about that?
Honestly, I think I'm hearing the same things that everybody else is hearing right now. I think Michelle Tafoya would be an excellent candidate, somebody who comes in with a lot of name ID and the ability to fundraise. We also have some other candidates who are running for the U.S. Senate seat that have put in a lot of time and work to really bring the delegates together and make strides to show that they can be competitive. And I'm not talking about Royce White, but I think that it'll be an interesting year. Obviously, with this being an open seat, I do think that Tafoya definitely comes in, if she gets in, with an advantage. But whether or not she actually gets in, I'm still holding my cards to see if that happens and how it plays out if it does.
I want to go back to Todd Rapp, because, of course, you are excellent when it comes to knowing what's happening at the Capitol. That question that we were talking about with Preya about, Governor Walz says he's still on the job. There's still a lot to do in this coming session. But really, what can be done given how close the margins are at the state legislature and into the political vitriol that we've seen in the past?
And the fact that everybody's running for election to come. And we're seeing a number of retirements that have been announced already. We'll see more. Let's also remember the Walz way has never been to put himself into all the policy discussions. Governor Dayton was really active on the policy side. Governor Walz picks a few priorities, but other than that, he kind of lets Democrats in the legislature work their way through issues, and then he takes the microphone and he tries to be the cheerleader, on the issues that they're working on. And I'm not sure that's going to change a whole lot, particularly now that he's a lame duck governor, and it's not, and we're moving towards a very contentious election. I'd also add one other factor that I don't know if it's coincidence or causation, and that is that ever since Marty Sable ran in 1978 for Congress, the people who have been the Speaker of the House who have moved on to run for higher office have seen their caucuses lose in the upcoming election. And I don't know if that's internal caucus fighting or, like I say, if it's just by chance. But it's not a tradition in Minnesota for the Speaker to run for higher office and to see his or her caucus be successful in the upcoming election. I'll be keeping an eye on that, whether there's any signs that there are problems within the House Republican caucus because there's such a battle for the governor's race, as well as the fact that the Speaker is one of the people in that battle.
I'm also wondering when was the last time a caucus leader, other than Tim Pawlenty, who's House Majority Leader, actually got to the promised land on a statewide ticket. It's been a while. Yeah,
it's not a great office to run for higher office from. That doesn't mean this is the Speaker is going to be an excellent candidate for the endorsement. There's no question about that. But it's not necessarily a recipe for success. And certainly if it is Amy Klobuchar running for governor, putting the one person who has 4 consecutive times won by 16 or more points in her elections is certainly a stronger place to be than I think what the Republican Party is going to go through, which is a pretty long endorsement fight and then likely a multi-candidate primary fight.
Brad, do you see Speaker Demuth maybe stepping aside as well? Maybe this is not her opportunity to run? Is that possible?
I mean, I don't think so. I think when she named her LG candidate, Ryan Wilson, she made it very clear that she was in it to win it. I think a lot of these candidates are probably going to stick it out through the convention. Whether or not they choose to go to a primary, I think is going to be a larger conversation. I do think that there are some candidates that need to take a serious look about whether or not they stay in this race, just to help consolidate the field heading into the convention. But I think for the first time in quite some time, we do have a group of candidates that come in with different perspectives, great ideas, who can be very competitive in an open seat for November, especially considering the circumstances that we have going on statewide at the moment.
Well, Preya Samsundar and Todd Rapp, always great talking to you both with your insights. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
you.
Todd Rapp, DFL strategist, Preya Samsundar, GOP communications consultant. 11:49 on a really busy Monday.
It's only Monday.
I know. That's what I thought. Actually, when I got here, 3 o'clock this morning, I thought, yeah, I can just see this. This is going to be a really busy day. And starting
you and
the
I were
first week,
online at 11 or 12 last night, so it's you did not get any sleep. I can tell.
No, nor did you. But this is why we're here, Brian Baxt. This is why we're here. In case you're just tuning in, by the way, Governor Tim Walz held a brief news conference this morning to announce he will not seek re-election. He did not take any questions, and that's what we're kind of talking about here. He says he'll come back tomorrow and maybe answer some questions about his decision not to run for a third term. So we're kind of parsing out his decision here on the air. We are going to actually talk to Matt Sepik right now, because really all this is centered around proven allegations of fraud, proven cases of fraud in state government, and also allegations of fraud in a number of state run programs. And so so much has been spent in terms of time and stories on these allegations of fraud. So I want to just kind of start there and kind of give folks an idea of how we got here.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do here is call in Matt Sepik in a couple of minutes. First, though, I want to actually go back to what the governor said earlier this morning about fraud. Let's hear that.
A single taxpayer dollar wasted on fraud should be intolerable. And while there's a role to play for everyone, from the legislature to prosecutors to insurance companies to local and county government, the buck does stop with me. My administration has been taking fast, decisive action to solve this crisis. We'll win the fight against the fraudsters. But the political gamesmanship we're seeing from Republicans is only making that fight harder. We've got Republicans here in the state legislature playing hide and seek with potential whistleblowers. We've got conspiracy theorist right-wing YouTubers breaking into our daycares, demanding access to our children. We've got the President of the United States demonizing our Somali neighbors and wrongfully confiscating funds that Minnesotans rely on. It's disgusting and it's dangerous.
Let's bring in Matt Sepik, Minnesota Public Radio's Matt Sepik. Hey, Matt Sepik, who has spent a lot of time covering this issue of fraud.
Indeed.
Yeah, let us talk a little bit here about where you first started with this and how all this started.
Well, it is going back almost 4 years now. I was just looking back through some of my old stories, putting together a timeline, and it was January 20th of 2022, so coming up on 4 years ago, that the FBI raided 27 locations around the Twin Cities. That includes the offices of the now defunct nonprofit, infamous nonprofit, Feeding Our Future, the home of its founder, Amy Bach, and 25 other homes and businesses and restaurants related to what turned out, we thought at the time, was Minnesota's largest scandal involving fraud. Allegations were that $250 million in taxpayer money was stolen by Feeding Our Future and the fake meal sites that it sponsored when owners of restaurants were putting in false reimbursements reimbursement forms to get money from 2 federal child nutrition programs for food that they never served. Fast forward to 2024, 5 people were convicted at the first Feeding Our Future trial of stealing $47 million as part of this larger fraud. And then last year, in the spring, Amy Bach herself was convicted alongside of a restaurant owner, Salim Saeed, owner of a Safari restaurant, used to be on Lake Street. And, for years now, we thought this was it. This was the extent of the fraud was during the pandemic, when restaurants were allowed to participate in these longstanding federal child nutrition programs, that this was the extent of it. But really in the last year, we found out just how more serious the fraud was. It wasn't just the food programs. We're looking at billions now in fraud in Medicaid programs, 14 different Medicaid programs. And in December, Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson estimated that fraud since 2018 in these Medicaid programs could total around $9 billion.
And Matt, of course, it's a number that the governor has disputed and said, if you're going to throw it out there, charge the cases. But there's been this interesting byplay between the Walz administration and those federal prosecutors saying, we want to work with you, while at the same time, the federal prosecutors really made it untenable, it seems, for Walz to go forward.
It is an interesting back and forth, and the federal prosecutors, and I've been covering this case for a while. I don't have any reason to believe that they are exaggerating. They've proven now at trial $300 million worth of fraud between Feeding Our Future and people, restaurants that were sponsored by another nonprofit. No one from Partners in Quality Care has been charged, but this organization did sponsor meal sites that were fraudulent, as proven at the first Feeding Our Future trial in 2024. And now, obviously, we're looking at Medicaid fraud. And last year, we began to see the first batch of charges in that Housing Stabilization Services program, which is set up to keep vulnerable people from falling into homelessness by connecting them with housing services. Governor Walz actually ordered that program shut down in August. It was closed by the end of October. We have about 13 people charged in that case. The last group charged just in December, and a federal autism program. Now we're beginning to see charges. 2 people have been charged in that. One actually was convicted in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme as well, as this FBI investigation has expanded.
Matt, can you talk about how this is intersected with the immigration issue, particularly as it relates to the Somali community, and what made it so attractive perhaps for President Donald Trump to engage here and some of these online influencers to come in here and film some of these more or less gotcha pieces?
In the Feeding Our Future case alone, I'm looking at this spreadsheet that I've been keeping for the last 4 years of covering this. There are 78 defendants, including the convicted ringleader, Amy Bach. She is white. She was the founder of Feeding Our Future. But the vast majority of the defendants in the Feeding Our Future case and in the others involving Medicaid, as they have begun to be prosecuted, are Somali Americans. And that has led to all sorts of bigotry and racist comments, as we have heard from the president and others, influencers online. And it is really drawn a harsh spotlight on this community. Much of it is unfair and racist, but there is a kernel of truth in given it that the vast majority, as I say, of the defendants in this case are Somali Americans, any allegations that they are illegal immigrants, largely not true. I believe one of the defendants I found just from attending court proceedings is undocumented, but the vast majority are American citizens, naturalized American citizens. But certainly their race and their nationality has drawn all sorts of ugliness online.
By the way, do we all know, are there still ICE raids going on? It seems like it's been fairly quiet.
Well, the White House issued some numbers last week where they said they've arrested 1,000 people over the course of this Operation Metro Surge, and they really haven't said much about who has been arrested other than the ones that they target as the worst of the worst they put online. So a lot of information isn't known.
Matt Sebek, because you've spent so much time on this issue, what are the next steps here? Because it is it's tough to get your arms wrapped around this, right? So you did a great job explaining how it started. Where are we right now in all this process?
The next thing I'll be watching for is the sentencing of Amy Bach, the ringleader. She was convicted at a trial last year, and she's facing decades in prison. One of the people convicted at the first trial got 28 years. There are some obstruction enhancements in that as well. And the other thing I'll be watching for, Kathy, are more charges as the Medicaid fraud investigations continue. That is really just getting started.
All right. Matt Sepik, thank you so much for the background. We appreciate it. Good work.
You're welcome.
That's NPR's Matt Sepik. Brian Baxt, we're going to go to news here. And then, of course, Nina Moyni and Minnesota Now right around the corner. And you're going to continue.
I'm going to shuffle over there.
I know, but we appreciate all your time here. What's the one thing you want to leave with listeners before we go?
That there's one big shoe left to drop, and that's whether Amy Klobuchar runs. And if she does, it could be a race changer.
By the way, we will be talking to House Speaker Lisa Damoth, Republican candidate for governor, on All Things Considered with Clay Masters. And then I'll talk to former DFL Congressman Dean Phillips tomorrow, and also Secretary of State Steve Simon on Morning Edition tomorrow, too. So there's a lot left to talk about.
And we'll hear from Governor Walz in question format at some point.
At some point, exactly. Brian Baxt, thank you so much.
You're welcome,
This
Kathy.
is Minnesota Public Radio News.
Programming supported by St. Paul Academy and Summit School, whose pre-K program focuses on lifelong learning and creativity. Now accepting applications for 2026-2027. Learn more at spa.edu.